Greetings, welcome to Baba Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwasi Konadu. On this episode, we're going to take a trip down the path of my experiences of becoming a Busumfo, Lakan Busumfo, that was educated in the town and village of Techiman, Central Ghana, from the years 2004 to about 2009. And I'm going to take you through that to kind of lead you as a jumping off point for some broader discussion and takeaways. So let's get right into it. So, background. While a PhD student at Howard University, Washington, D.C., I began doing research on indigenous medicine, healers, knowledge systems among the Bono people of Techiman, which is an Akan society located in central Ghana. For those of you familiar with Ghana, approximately 2 hours northwest of Kumasi, you'll find the township and the village of Techiman. Techiman is a very special place, very ancient town. In fact, one of the earliest settlements and formations among the Akan peoples who migrated from that region to parts further south into the deep forest and, of course, eventually to the coast. And so I've written about these people in a number of my works, and so if you're interested, you can check out those works at www.kwasikonadu.info. For now, let's jump into the story. So while doing research in Techiman, I became very fascinated by so many different kinds of approaches to medicine, healing, and therapeutics. And so this was a very important thing to me because some of you know from my previous videos, my maternal grandfather who reared me, who I grew up with in Jamaica, was an herbalist and medicine man himself, also a spiritualist. And so I was with him day and night. I found other children to be boring. I found my grandfather to be fascinating, so I would always follow him, trail him, and be with him. Even when he went to work, I would follow him, sometimes to meet him at work. Nonetheless, my grandfather became my inspiration for my entryway into this healing arts and medicine. And so while being fascinated, by what I saw as a doctoral student doing my PhD studies, afterwards, something in me said, okay, let me just think about, pursuing this path of becoming a healer, becoming particularly a Busumfo. There are two main kinds of spiritualists among the Akan and the Bono specifically. One is the Akomfo, that's plural. Akomfo is singular. The Obusumfo is singular. Abusumfo is plural. Now, these two are similar in some ways, but the Busumfo is the senior, the Akomfo is a junior. And there's a reason why. I won't get into it now because I want to keep this video within reasonable length. But for those of you interested in all these finer details, check out, again, my work on the Akan in general and the Bono in particular, right, at the website I shared with you earlier on. So in doing so, the family that I stayed with for the course of my research in the village of Inyafuma, I approached them about studying with them, right? And so, of course, in order to do so, you have to show that you have the capacity or the ability to communicate with a Abusum or Obusum, singular, that is a spiritual force entity that have different points of origin. The one in particular that I had access to, or that was with me, came to be Tano Kofi, or Takofi for short. That is, the Tano River is the most sacred river in Ghana and among the Akan peoples in particular. And that river produces several spiritual offspring, Takofi being the second or third in that particular line or genealogy. And so I began to, quote unquote, train as a Busumfo with this family for a number of years. Finished and graduated, and of course began practicing on my own. But over the course of the years, I was unsettled, because one thing I am, not only a historian at heart, I'm very suspicious, and that's why I ask a lot of questions because of my suspicions about people, human nature, their motivations, and so on. And I think that's a very healthy thing to have. Now, I'm not suspicious to the point of anxiety, but I have a hint of suspicion that leads me not to take things at face value or for granted. And so I began to question things along the way because things I experienced and saw didn't seem right, even though I didn't have the background in which to compare whether it's right or wrong, or appropriate or inappropriate for me. But I had questions, and one of those questions was about the nature of these Obusum. I remember my dear elder who passed away. And by the way, my time, in Techiman was enriched by my relationship with the several elders. One of them is Nana Kofi Chereme, who passed away. Love Nana Kofi Chereme. Humble, deeply knowledgeable, protective. He guarded the culture, the spiritual culture, that is. And I loved him for that. He denied me an interview because of what I wanted to know. But I respected him even more because of his denial, because I saw that he was a clearinghouse, a safeguard for what was important. And he told me that the younger healers, younger people, they don't understand. They're willing to talk to anyone. But he said, look, for me to share what I know, you have to be one of us. And I respected him so much for that, right? And so it's men like that, elders like that, Nana Kofi Chereme, and of course one of my favorites who passed away recently, Nana Kwajo Bekwim. Nana Bekwim was my favorite. Miss him to this day dearly, right? We became very close because he's the one that actually helped me to to bring to earth and to settle or domesticate takofi in the brass pan that Busumfo carry on their heads. And so not only for that, but he was very dear and close to me for many, many reasons. If I have a chance to, I'll do an episode on him. Suffice to say, it is elders like these, Nana Kofi Chereme and Nana Bekwim, that really, was my entryway into this world, who I learned a lot from. So I began to question the very nature of these Abusum. Began to question, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why do we do sacrifices as blood sacrifices? Why do we do things that we're not that way? And a lot of my questions were unanswered. It was simply a matter of, well, this is what we've always done, or this is how we've done it. And so, I went along with it, but of course, anyone that has questions and they're not answered, they're going to find a way or find something different to answer their questions. And so along the way, I began to really see things for myself, particularly my dreams. And so whether it's Takofi or whether it's the God Almighty, or it is other spiritual entities, they would show me things. Even under Bekwim and others would come and show me things in my dream. I remember I had one dream in particular. I go to the Busumfi of Tamensa. Tamensa is the most important Abusum in Techiman. It is the Abusum for the state of Techiman. And of course, the Busumfo is the Okonfoheni, or the head of all Okonfo Busum for the entire region of Techiman and beyond. And so that Busum, which is Tamensa, is very, very important. And I remember going through the street, there's a street called Tano Street, by the roundabout. And I went across the street to the Busumfi, that is a sacred center, the temple. And I walked in there and it was sort of empty. And there was a man, an elderly man there. I remember I asked him a question. And I said, why can't the spiritual culture system be, so simple? And he said to me that, roughly that, there is no other way. And he said, look, it can be very simple. And that, what you see is not really, all that it has to be. And so my takeaway from my conversation with this elder in my dream, was really about another way to think about African spirituality. And the way that I see it, African spirituality is as simple as water and breathing. It's that simple. That is breathing, whether it is forms of meditation or centering yourself, and water, that is using water to pay homage to the earth and the spirits thereof, but also to the Almighty and to the entities that ride in between the two, that is of the nature of those two entities, that is Mother Earth, which in Tree referred to as Asasiya, and of course the Almighty, which of course in Tree referred to numerously Nyame, the Shining One, or Dumankuma, or Chidiampong, and so on. And so in my questioning and in my quest, I began to probe. And I remember one day Nana Bekwim said to me, "Do you believe in the Abusum?" I said, "I do, but to a point, right?" And and I meant it because I wasn't fully convinced, because I don't want to be a believer. I want to be a knower. I want to know certainly. And so because I wasn't fully a believer and simply doing things because people said to do it that way, or doing things because that's how it's done. And I don't know who these entities are. I'm just simply told that, this is Takofi, or this is Kwabinabina, or this is, Tamensa, or this is, Takura. And we do this, we do sacrifices, we do rituals, we do offerings, we carry the pan, we throw carousels in divination, we do so on. And I want to know why, and whom are we really entertaining? Whom are we really engaging? I remember once told that if you see the face of the Abusum, that is the spiritual forces, you will die. That's not true. I've seen the face of Takofi several times, right? Once covered, but I've also seen it uncovered. And I've also seen it as pure water, because it's a river. And so it's pure water in the shape of a man. I saw the face, right? And obviously I'm still here, talking to you. And so that's not true. So, and I give you that as an example, my friends, about why I keep pushing, why I keep probing. And this is why, for those of you that watch this, for those of you that know my work, really love my work, because I'm pushing, I'm probing. I don't have all the answers or pretend to. But what I will do is seek them out. I will quest for them. And so I kept on pushing and pushing and pushing. And I see that the very people who, quote unquote, trained me were undermining me all along, were sabotaging me all along, were looking for my downfall all along, right? Because I kept asking and pushing and pushing. And so I let them alone. I can love from a distance. I can respect from a distance. And that drew me close to Nana Bekwim. So we got really close and tight many years ago, right? And he became my mainstay. So I would travel to Timana and just see him and him alone, because that's who my soul found comfort with, and that's who, I wanted to engage. And Nana Bekwim is amazing, was amazing, is amazing. And I owe a lot, to him. I learned a lot from him. But even he, I questioned, right? But he entertained my questions, right? And I remember he and Elders like Nana Kofi Donko, I didn't meet in the flesh, but I met and I wrote about him in this book called Our Way in This Part of the World. They would always say Nyame pe. That is, if it is God's will, if it is God's desire, then this will happen. In other words, they always put the Almighty first. And in my so-called training, I didn't get that. It was always about the Abusum. And I have spoken to friends who are among the Yoruba, or part of the so-called Yoruba tradition. People are part of the Vodum tradition. And they are enamored with the Loas, with the Orishas, and with the Abusum, and whatever else, other kinds of African spiritual cultures. And at the center of what they do, the Almighty is simply a vague symbol or vague concept. And I remember I'm pouring libation, and I'm always starting with, Chudia Ponkwame, Yanko Ponkwame, Odumankoma, Nyame, and so on. And it was never something that was connecting to me, never resonated with me that, wait a second, if the Almighty, if God is the air we breathe, the water we drink, the sun that shines upon our beautiful skins, the food that we eat from the earth that nourishes us, the wind and breeze that blows upon us, if it is so ubiquitous, so omnipresent, so so everywhere, how is it it's not the center of what we do as spiritualists? That to me made no sense at all. Kept on asking, kept on pushing. And I said, oh, Kwasi, well, Nyame or God is, is too distant and far away. It's not a part of human affair. I said, well, that makes no sense. If God is so integral into everything that we do and is everywhere we are and is with us at all times, how is it not a part of our ritual and spiritual life and practice? Those connecting points to me made absolutely no sense. And so today, I no longer claim to be a Busumfo. Yes, I'm a healer, and I'll tell you how it works. A friend of mine asked me this on a Zoom call. I was talking to this friend, and he asked me, I said, the question to me was, would I be able to help assist young Okonfo and Busumfo who are coming up in a so-called Akan tradition, Akan spiritual culture? And I said, yes, from a distance and vaguely I'll be able to help. But I said, I can't commit to anything because I don't do that anymore. And so this friend asked me, well, what's the source of your power? And I said without hesitation, as I'm saying to you, I said, God. I said, that's the source of my powers, right? Because God is certain. God answers all of my questions. The Almighty answers every questions, every, curiosity, that I have. Because the Almighty knows my heart, knows my soul, right? And it's a questing soul. It wants to know the truth. It's not a soul that's satisfied with dogma, satisfied with what people say and do because that's what they've always done, satisfied with the status quo, satisfied with this is the way we've always done it, without any particular logic or reasoning for how and why we do it that way. And so what I've learned is this, is that some of the rituals I still do, sacrifices I still do, and everything else, but I do it with the Almighty at the center. And what the Almighty does is dispatches spiritual entities or forces, which we may call Abasumit reachers, but I don't know who they are. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I know entities as God sends, right? Because I feel it. I see them. And they work at the behest of the Almighty to carry out a particular work for a client, for a family member, or sometimes even strangers. And so I still do the same kinds of ritual work. I still do the same kinds of involving sacrifices, involving different kinds of materials that I've shared with you before, everything from spices, to more, more extravagant, exotic, kinds of things that are required for each particular work. Each particular work is like a recipe, right? And a recipe requires different ingredients. And those ingredients may include everything from shells to stones to rocks to water to beers to alcoholic beverages to sodas, to rice to black pepper to salt. It's all, in most cases, organic materials, right? To soil, right? And so what the recipe calls for, I call on the Almighty to guide me, and then the Almighty will send to me different spiritual entities of God. Because you see, the question we don't ask ourselves, as I've asked myself, whose side is Shango really on? Who is really Ogun? What side of the team are they batting for? What team are they playing for? Do we really know who they are? Are they working for the force of God? And these are questions I'm not simply asking as criticism, because they're not criticism. These are questions that I've had, right? And I think some of you who are questioning will have the same kinds of questions, same kinds of, seeking, answers to, because we've been taking for granted things that we have been given, or have thinking because it's African, then it's all good. Not so, right? And so many of the things that I have done before, I still do, but I do it with around the axis of God, an axis of Almighty. And of course, the Almighty will dispatch particular entities that will come and carry out the work. It could be one, it could be several. And we do the same kinds of things, right? Offerings and so on, right? But we do it with, again, the center, the core of it. God is at the center, right? This way it's ensured that the work is going to be that's going to be positive, productive, and for the well-being of the individual or the group or the family that I'm working for. And so, do I think my experience of Basumfo was worth it? No. I wasted time, money, energy, years for something I didn't need. Do I regret? A little bit. I don't regret in wholesale because I met some wonderful people along the way. As I said, Nana Cheremi, Nana Bequim, and many others, Nana Kofi Wusu in Poma Kron, some very, very good people I met along the way, My man, Nana Ifa, who's the Busumfo, Kung Fu Hene, of all the Kung Fu Busumfo in Techiman. Some really, really good people, man. People with good hearts, good souls, that many of them are ancestors now that I miss dearly. And so, no, I don't regret in full or wholesale, but I didn't need what I went through, right? Now, having gone through it, now, yes, I can say that with full confidence. And for some of us, we think that's the way. And what I'm suggesting is another way, right? Let God be the driver of the vehicle. Be a passenger and let the Almighty guide you through. And I think you will see, like I have seen, that we can still do the same kinds of work and rituals, but being led with certainty, with clarity, and with an entity that is the Almighty, who will answer all your questions, satisfy all your desires, and of course, make things clear in terms of the path that you're on. And I'm proud to say that I'm a servant of the Almighty and will continue to serve the Almighty and my people along the way. For Baba and Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Drop your questions and comments and experiences down below. Until next time, Stay well.